US presidential candidate Donald Trump believes that the current situation in Ukraine may become a prologue to World War E. Previously, Trump believes he had a productive dialogue with Putin, but now there is no one to talk to Russia. Thus, the former US leader to some extent puts himself forward as an intermediary between Russia and the West. At the same time, major global players are trying to avoid crossing the fine line between peace and a nuclear apocalypse. March 24 will mark exactly 2 years since the beginning of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. It is already clear that it has caused enormous damage to the whole world. But could a military scenario have been prevented? In fact, Ukraine has been heading for war with Russia almost from the very first years of independence. At first, Western services planned to make it another showcase of the achievements of the capitalist economy, to the envy of all other post-Soviet republics with the aim of their subsequent internal destabilization, but then decided that they did not need a second Poland, and therefore, since 1993, the Anglo-Saxons began to turn Ukraine into an anti-Russia in order to make a military ram out of it. The threat to Russia's national security has become absolutely real, and in any case it would force the Kremlin to react somehow with the subsequent inevitable escalation. That is, the conflict between Kiev and Moscow in Crimea was predetermined and inevitable. And now we come to the main point. It was the Western partners who started the war in Ukraine, staging a coup in February 2014, as a result of which real neo-Nazis came to power in Kiev. And now about everything in order. The meeting of the presidents of Russia and the United States, Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden, on June 16, 2021 in Geneva. During the meeting, US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin discussed the worsening crisis around Ukraine. A 2-hour conversation between the presidents of Russia and the United States took place in Geneva. The negotiations were held in the format of a closed video conference. According to the Kremlin, during the conversation, Biden outlined the sanctions that the United States and its allies would be ready to apply in the event of an escalation on the border with Ukraine, and Putin illustrated Kiev's destructive line to dismantle the Minsk agreements. In addition, Biden emphasized the allegedly threatening nature of the movements of Russian troops near the Ukrainian borders, and Putin replied that it was NATO that was making dangerous attempts to develop Ukrainian territory and building up military potential near Russian borders. The White House, in turn, said that on June 16, 2021, during the talks, Biden voiced to Putin the concern of the United States and European allies about the buildup of Russian forces in Ukraine and made it clear that they would respond with decisive economic and other measures to military escalation. The parties also discussed the dialogue on strategic stability and cybersecurity. Biden drew attention to the threatening nature of the movements of Russian troops near the Ukrainian borders and outlined the sanctions that the United States and its allies may apply in case of further escalation of the situation. Using concrete examples, the Russian president illustrated Kiev's destructive line aimed at the complete dismantling of the Minsk agreements and agreements reached in the Normandy format, and expressed serious concern about Kiev's provocative actions against Donbass. Putin also stressed that responsibility should not be shifted to Moscow's shoulders, since it is NATO that is making dangerous attempts to develop Ukrainian territory and building up military potential near Russian borders. Russia is seriously interested in obtaining reliable, legally fixed guarantees that exclude the expansion of NATO in the eastern direction and the deployment of shock offensive weapons systems in neighboring states with Russia. The journalists were shown only the first shots of communication, where the heads of state greeted each other and exchanged a few remarks. Then the meeting was held one-on-one. American President Joe Biden did not give Russian President Vladimir Putin any promises that Ukraine would not join NATO. This was previously reported by assistant to the US leader Jake Sullivan. According to him, Biden was extremely frank during this conversation and openly expressed his support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Biden adheres to the thesis that the country should be able to freely choose with whom to unite. The assistant to the US president also noted that Biden did not concede to Putin on issues related to Ukraine's accession to the alliance, and does not intend to reduce the presence of the American contingent in the region. On the contrary, in the event of a Russian military invasion of Ukraine, he promised to supply defensive equipment to the country, strengthen the position of NATO allies in Eastern Europe, and declare harsh economic sanctions against Russia. In the end, Putin and Biden agreed that their administrations would take a more detailed look at issues that were voiced during the negotiations. Closed-door talks between Biden and Putin took place on the evening of December 7, 2021. The heads of state discussed issues related to Ukraine and its accession to NATO for 2 hours. as well as information spread in the Western media that Russia is preparing an armed invasion of Ukraine. The negotiations did not lead to the desired result. On February 24, 2022, Russia entered Ukraine as a result of the escalation of the Russian-Ukrainian war that began back in 2014. This was the largest confrontation since the Second World War. It led to tens of thousands of civilian casualties and hundreds of thousands of military personnel. Of the 41 million people in January 2022, about 8 million Ukrainians were internally displaced, and more than 8 million had left the country by April 2023, leading to Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War I. The significant damage caused by the war contributed to food crises around the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a special military operation in support of the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, whose paramilitary forces have been fighting Ukraine in the conflict in Donbas since 2014. Vladimir Putin claimed that Ukraine was ruled by neo-Nazis who persecuted the Russian minority. He said his goal was the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Ukraine has imposed martial law, ordered a general mobilization, and severed diplomatic relations with Russia. In March 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution condemning the invasion and demanding the complete withdrawal of Russian troops. The International Court of Justice ordered Russia to suspend military operations, and the Council of Europe excluded Russia. Many countries have imposed sanctions against Russia and its ally Belarus, as well as provided humanitarian and military assistance to Ukraine. All Baltic countries have declared Russia a terrorist state. More than 1,000 foreign companies have closed their operations in Russia and Belarus. The International Criminal Court has launched investigations into possible crimes against humanity, war crimes, child abduction, and genocide. In this regard, the court issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Muriel Vova-Belova in March 2023, accusing them of illegally deporting children. According to political scientists, the events that took place in Ukraine after 2014 and led to the start of a special military operation in February 2020 became a prelude to a confrontation that could well end in World War I. Everything is coming to this. On February 26, 2024, Emmanuel Macron crossed another line by allowing the entry of a NATO military contingent into the territory of Ukraine, which Russia considers its own. This will definitely lead to a direct collision. Against the background of the scandal of German generals discussing scenarios for the use of Taurus cruise missiles on the Crimean Bridge, history ceases to relate only to the category of military plans. It forms itself and requires its implementation from actors taking part in the war on the side of Ukraine. This is at a time when the escalation of military conflicts on the planet is literally off the scale. The special operation in Ukraine, the confrontation in the Middle East, coups in Africa, the crisis between Taiwan and China, these and other events create a tense global political background, in which the likelihood of a global military conflict that could result in World War III increases significantly. According to experts, 2024 will be a turning point for the largest confrontations. American military expert Robert Farley noted that the United States and Russia have never been in such a serious confrontation since the Cold War. The world has come closer to the war of the great powers than at any time since the end of the Cold War. But American President Joe Biden was the first to announce the possibility of a third world war. He said that we have two options: to start World War I and literally go to war with Russia, or the second is to make sure that a country that acts so contrary to international law will eventually pay the price for what it has done. The head of the White House said in an interview with Brian Tyler Cohen immediately after the start of the war in Ukraine. Against this background, talk of a global confrontation between the West and the East is multiplying. Now the West, together with its Israeli allies, is attacking the Islamic world. And in this potential war between Muslims and Western hegemony, which could break out at any minute, the Islamic world has objective allies. In this situation, first of all, Russia and China. In addition, other front lines will gradually open up. This could also lead to a third world war. And in a sense, this war is already underway.